Every day may not be good, but there is something good about every day. A very good mornings, dear students. Today I am here to continue with the fourth part of the chapter, Politics of Planned Development. Till now we have covered topics like the first 5-year plan, the second 5-year plan, a comparative study between the private and the public sector, and the agro-based economic policies and the industrial revolution. So today we will be seeing that how the foundation policies were laid and what all outcomes were guaranteed by the government after the revolutions have taken place. Apart from that, we'll give a brief definition of green revolution. We'll peep into the policies of green revolution, whether it was beneficiary for the general public or not, and how did it affect agriculture. So beginning with slide number 1. Foundations. In this period, the foundations of India's future economic growth were laid. Some of the largest developmental projects in India were undertaken during this period. These included the mega dams like the Bhakra Nagal and the Hirakund for irrigation and power generation. Some of the heavy industries in the public sector, steel plants, oil industries and refineries, manufacturing industries were also undertaken. Infrastructure for transport and communications were improved, that may be included in the tertiary sector as well. Of late, some of these mega projects have come in for a lot of criticism. If you remember, in the previous video, we have studied that whenever a project is undertaken, it is going to affect the localites first of all. For example, if a dam construction undergoes, then maybe the government is benefiting or it is a beneficiary out of the project, but the localites, the people who live in that area, may not get its benefit. They feel that they are uprooted from their land, and that is why they'll find it difficult to find their daily bread and altogether their housing and so on. Moving on to the next slide. But the other two components of land reforms were much less successful. I think we need to go to the previous slide. Land reforms. In the agrarian sector, that is a sector which is mainly based on agriculture, this period witnessed a serious attempt of land reforms. Perhaps the most significant and successful of these was the abolition of the colonial system of zamindari. Students, if you remember, we have discussed this concept of land reforms in the previous video, wherein I told you that the structure of the land distribution was a great problem in front of the government. Moreover, the role of zamindars was such as if they considered themselves as next to God. So the farmers, the yeomen, were altogether rolled up in such an awful, you can say, project that from one generation to another, they could not take themselves out of that. And that is why they felt irksome. This bold act not only released land from the clutches of a class that had little interest in agriculture, it also reduced the capacity of the landlords to dominate the politics. So this revolution in land reforms was very, you can say, profitable for the farmers. Why? Because one, they were out of the land reform system. They were out of the, you can say, the dominance of the land owners, the zamindars, and moreover they could feel that now, because of the intervention of the government into their policies and into their plans, the zamindars were not able to take a hold of them. Attempts at consolidated land, bringing small pieces of land together in one place so that the farm size could become viable for agriculture. This particular, you can say, step was fairly successful. Moving on to the next slide. But the other two components of land reforms were much less successful. Though the laws were made up to the upper limit or the ceiling to how much agricultural land one person could own, people with excess land managed to evade the law. Somehow, as I told you, that some of the people, especially the zamindars and the landlords, had a lot of land with them, so they were able to, you can say, go against the policies of the government, and they were able to secure more and more land as they could wish. It was not easy to turn these well-meaning policies on agriculture into genuine and effective action. So herein you can notice that there was a difference between legislation of the policies and its execution. This could happen only if the rural landless poor were mobilized. The landowners were very powerful and wielded considerable political influence. Therefore, many proposals for land reforms were either not translated into laws, or when made into laws, they were simply on paper. That is, they were not properly executed. Now, we are moving on to our next slide, wherein we will study a food crisis. From there, we can understand well that what were the reasons behind revolutions which took place in the country, and some of, or you can say a couple of very strong revolutions which took place in this phase based on agriculture and dairy products. Was one was the Green Revolution and another was the White Revolution. So moving on to food crisis. The agricultural situation went from bad to worse in 1960s, between 1965 and 67 probably. Severe droughts occurred in many parts of the country. This was also the period when the country faced 2 wars and the foreign exchange crisis. So you can say that from all spheres, the country was dealing with a very bad economic condition. All this resulted in severe food shortage and famine-like conditions in many parts of the country. It was in Bihar that the food crisis was most acutely felt, as the state faced a near famine situation. The food shortage was significant in all the districts, with 9 districts producing less than half of the normal output. Food deprivation subsequently led to acute and widespread malnutrition. Now you can very well understand that when there was a crisis for food, then obviously the health of the people was ought to get affected. Death rate in Bihar in 1967 was 34% higher than the number of the death occurred in the following year altogether in the country. Moving on to our next slide. Food prices also hit a high in Bihar during the year, even when compared with other North Indian states. For wheat and rice, which is considered to be the staple crops in the northern India, in the state were twice or more than their prices in most of the prosperous states like Punjab. The government had zoning policies which prohibited trade of food across the states. This reduced to the availability of food in Bihar, and in situations like this, the poorest sections of the society were the ones who were utmost affected. Now, the first priority of the planners, you can guess very well that when there was a food crisis specifically in the state of Bihar, and moreover the staple foods like wheat and rice were badly affected in the you can say towards the north of the country, then automatically the planners of the constitution and the economic planners had a target in front of them, and that was to increase agriculture production by anyhow with leaps and bounds. So now we are going to study Green Revolution. Before this, before starting with Green Revolution, I'll just read on the last few points. Now the first priority of the planners was to somehow attain self-sufficiency in food. The entire planning process and the sense of optimism and pride associated with it suffered a setback, because they felt that altogether it was a setback for the economy, it was a setback for the people, who were not able to get nutritious food, and it was a setback for the farmers as well. So now with the you can say beginning of the Green Revolution, we will see that what all changes had taken place in the economy. Students, now we will be moving on to the next slide, that is the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution, I will tell you, is also considered to be the third agricultural revolution, which basically took place between 1950s and the late 1960s. It was started with you can say immediate target to hit the agricultural production, to increase it by leaps and bounds. So you must have studied Green Revolution in the previous classes as well, and some of its you can say prime targets or the prime tools that were taken up were the HIV seeds and moreover the irrigation policies that were taken. So we will study that how altogether it took place. In the face of the prevailing food crisis, the country was clearly vulnerable to the external pressures and the dependent on food aid, mainly from US, that is United States. The government adopted a new strategy in agriculture in order to ensure food stability. Now, it was decided to put more resources into those areas which already had irrigation and those farmers who already were well off. See, otherwise also, it is very easy to understand that whenever we want to hit on some targets in the economy of a country, then it is very beneficial if we start off with small steps. So the government thought that if the well-off farmers were given more of aid and more of crops or maybe more of loans, then it will be very easily you can say be successful, and they'll be very easily be able to produce more and more. The argument was that those who already had the capacity could help increase production rapidly in a short run. Thus, the government offered high yielding variety seeds, that is HYV seeds, wherein the high yielding seeds were provided to the farmers so that they can produce more and more. Fertilizers and pesticides, and there was a facility which they could avail, and that was loaning from the banks, from the nearby banks, from where they can get loans to buy seeds, to buy fertilizers and pesticides, to buy the irrigation tools, etc. The government also gave a guarantee to buy produce of the farmers at a given price, so that there can remain a balance among all the farmers. This was the beginning of what was called as the Green Revolution. So as I told you, the Green Revolution or the third agricultural revolution was targeted with the increase in agricultural production, basically of two crops, wheat and rice. And let me tell you that wheat and rice are also coupled to be called as the staple crops, specifically in the northern part of the country. Moving on to our next slide, the beneficiaries of the process. So this particular slide that is in front of you, that I'll be continuing in the next video. But before this, there is a recap of what we have studied. I started with the foundations. I told you that after the first 5-year plan and the second 5-year plan, the government was little baffled. Why? Because they were not as successful as the government had thought. Then after discussing you can say the food crisis that took place basically in the state of Bihar, we got to a point that the government now had a prime motive, and that was to increase the agricultural production, specifically with those farmers who are already well off, those who have funds with them, those who have resources with them, those who are little educated and they can understand well, so that it can begin at a faster rate. So the production of agricultural produce by giving the HYV seeds, then irrigational tools, pesticides, fertilizers, and apart from that the loaning of the banks was taken up altogether, which comes under the umbrella which is called as Green Revolution. When we say Green Revolution, Then this revolution took place between 1950s and the late 1960s, you can say, and altogether it was targeted with the two main crops, that was wheat and rice. We'll study about the beneficiaries of the process in the coming video. Till then, stay tuned, stay healthy. Thank you.